Hey everyone, it's Ashley Jones, Event Director at Marketing Showcase. Thanks for watching one of our recordings from Marketing Showcase Online. I really hope you enjoy it, and hopefully I'll see you at another one soon.
Hi everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining me at this time in the morning. Hopefully you do have a cuppa to hand. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Right, I'm trusting you can all see that. Ash, shout if it's not come up. The popular art of branding and blanding rather, and how to avoid it. That's the subject of my talk today. I'm going to dive straight in. Obviously, the first question is, what are we talking about? What on earth is blanding? Blanding is something you'll probably be familiar with, but you perhaps haven't consciously observed it. So we're seeing it, I think, more than we used to for various reasons. We're seeing brands within particular categories starting to look and sound more and more alike. It's probably best if I give a couple of examples. So here's one. If you take the challenger bank space or fintech space, and in the days when perhaps you were commuting in and out of London, you were to look up at some of the billboards, you'd see a lot of ads. And I think this is a really good example. A lot of these companies, they actually have a genuinely different proposition. They're trying to challenge, they're trying to disrupt. That's the irony of it. But in doing so, in a bid to present themselves as different, they're actually looking very similar. Similar in the use of typography, similar in the use of color, even language. If you look at some of these headlines, there's a tone of voice that's kind of consistent across the board. And a lot of these banks are challenging established banks, and they're trying to be different, and they're positioning themselves as different to the traditional banks. And yet, as a collective, they're looking very similar. Closer to home, something I observed when I was thinking about actually how to frame this presentation was the world of home meal kits, something I knew pretty little about, I think, pre-pandemic, pre-lockdown, but perhaps some of you guys can relate to this. At home, we've been starting to sort of try these just to mix it up a little bit, to change the cooking. And when you look at the brands that are now available, and you look at how their design language works, their brand identity, it's another pretty good example of blanding. Individually, they're quite interesting. Collectively, their wallpaper, they start to all look very, very similar. And you know, one particular organization, Mindful Chef, for example, what you don't get from this is that they're a B corporation. They're setting particularly high standards of social and environmental responsibility. So they are actually different, but the way they're presenting themselves to the world means they just blend in. They are in fact blanding. So there are a couple of examples. Why does it happen? Design is an industry that's not exempt from trends, just like music, just like fashion. Although design and particular brand identity ought to be, how can I put it, more resistant to trends, because the nature of brand identity is that you're actually trying to bring a brand to life, reinforce a brand positioning, reinforce what a brand stands for through an identity. But the reality is there is still a degree of trends involved. And I think we've seen that quite a lot recently with the rise in UX design, the need for accessibility, intuitive applications in digital formats has created a particular design aesthetic that has crept a lot into the world of brand identity. So the reality is brands brand identity is also trend-based to a degree, but I think there is something possibly deeper rooted. I think there is that human need to fit in, to conform, to be part of something, to belong, and that works against the tide of difference. And I think we see that increasingly in a number of these sectors. So whilst we might endeavour to be different, actually I think we are fighting at times a natural instinct, a human instinct to want to be part of something. So it begs the question, why is any of this a problem? A lot of what I've just shown you looks nice enough, but is blanding really a problem? And it's a problem because blanding is the antithesis of presenting yourself as different. And there are plenty of studies that demonstrate how not just being different, but just being perceived as different can have an impact on commercial success. So this particular study from Kantar and Brand Z in 2017 looked at a number of brands over a 3-year period that could be described as disruptive and different to varying degrees. And those that were identified as being different and disruptive, or the most different and disruptive, saw a 28% growth in brand value versus those at the other end of the spectrum that saw a decline in brand value. So a statistic a piece of research that supports the case. In a very similar vein, this research, again from Kantar, and this time with Millward Brown, looked at loyalty card data. And again, brands that could be described as different and meaningful, consumers were actually paying a premium for, a significant premium, 20% up on those at the other end of the scale, those that were perceived as less different and less meaningful. So there is real value in difference and actually avoiding sameness. So that the risk here is being bland. So how do we avoid it? Well, I want to introduce two ideas. One I think you'll be particularly familiar with. I suspect a lot of you are either lead marketing teams or in marketing teams or leading organizations where you think a lot about differentiation. How fundamentally are you going to differentiate your product, your service, your offering from your competitors, and really tap in to the needs and wants of your particular audiences? By contrast, distinctiveness is something a little bit different. Now, differentiation has been part and parcel of marketing strategy since really the earliest times of marketing. Distinctiveness is a relatively new phenomenon, or the idea of distinctiveness is a relatively new phenomenon. And it is a polarizing conversation in the marketing world. There are those who are firmly in the differentiation camp. It's all about how you are different in the way that I just described. There are those, and there's an increasing groundswell, if you like, around the notion of distinctiveness being the main driver in commercial success. So distinctiveness, by contrast to differentiation, is about how much you stand out. It's about how easily your brand comes to mind in a buying situation. That's mental availability, that's brand salience. So it's less about how you are different, but just how visible you are. And also, importantly, how readily you are recognized as you, because it's all very well being remembered, thought of, but if actually you're mistaken for another brand, which could easily be the case with those home meal kits, for example, or even those example of challenger banks, then it defeats the whole objective. And rather than think of them as polarizing, distinctive views on the same subject of brand building, I think the reality is they're two sides of the same coin. So let's look at them in a little more detail. I'm going to focus more on distinctiveness, but I'm going to briefly talk a little bit more about differentiation. So when we're differentiating, many of you may be familiar with this model, the 3 C's model. Is fundamentally about positioning, establishing your positioning as an organization. So what is the mental position that you are looking to establish in the mind of your target customer? And to arrive at that point, you need to be thinking about 3 things. You need to be thinking, first and foremost, about the needs and wants of your customer. Who are they? What do they want? What motivates them? You need to be looking at competitors. How are they operating? What is it that they offer? How are they potentially meeting some of the needs of your target customer? And then, of course, there's yourself. What can we actually deliver on? What can we do differently that meets needs in a better way than anybody else out there? And you'll know you're onto something when you can look at your positioning and think in terms of your particular audience. Is it compelling? Is it actually differentiated? Is it authentic, or is it something that we can deliver? And can we deliver it over the long term? Can we deliver it consistently over a period of time? And that's about it being sustainable. And once you've got that, if you like, button down. I mean, with a positioning statement, you want to keep it simple. It's no frills. The simpler, the best, the better. It's a guiding tool, if you like. And then you can think about how you might bring that to life as a story. I've used this example before. If any of you have attended my magnetic brands presentations, I've used Preservica because I think it's a really good example of creating difference and shaping difference. Preservica, they specialize in the digital preservation software. As you can see here, when we first started working with them, this is how they present themselves to the world. This is how they would talk about themselves. And it was very much about what they did and who they did it for. And what they do is actually pretty impressive, but other people do it as well. And what we were able to do was create a point of difference that was sat at a different level. So fundamentally, it was actually about the ultimate benefit they derived, the human impact. So we moved it from a difference of product to a difference, if you like, of people. We took it to a more emotive level. So moving from the nuts and bolts of what they do in terms of a digital platform, we could then talk in terms of actually, when it boils down to it, political memory, social, cultural memory, it's all at risk. And actually, Preservica, we're here to protect it. So a good example of difference. But as I say, I want to keep the focus of this on distinctiveness, because this is something most people know less about. So let me go into that a little bit more. At the heart of distinctiveness is this idea of distinctive assets or codes or elements. It's the assets that fundamentally make up your identity. And those assets can be really, really diverse. So we think of logos, but there's color, people, characters, illustrations, sounds, shapes. It's a multi-sensory approach. Even style of advertising, strap lines, etc. And these distinctive assets effectively work as proxies for the brand name. So if you were to read a particular strap line or see a particular shape and a color or hear a sound, you would be able to relate that directly to a brand name without the need for the brand name to be present. I thought the best way to demonstrate this would be to have a mini quiz. So unfortunately, there are no prizes at stake here unless Ash has something up his sleeve, but you might want to use the chat facility. I'm going to share with you 8 distinctive assets. I suspect you'll get all of them. You should do. That would serve the purpose of doing it, but have a go. Fingers on the buzzer. Let's see who's quickest. Off we go. Can anybody recognize that from just the shape, the silhouette? I'm guessing you can, and it might be making you a little bit thirsty. You may even be having one now. This cheeky character, what's the name of the brand? This is certainly a distinctive asset. What's the name of the brand? Number 3, easy one. It's called the swoosh. It looks like this. What is the brand name? I did try, and this is kind of taking my technical abilities to a little bit of a stretch, to embed some sound here, but I couldn't get it to work. I didn't want it to risk it being a problem. So I've tried to describe the sound. And if I was to say it aloud, it would be something like da-dum. And it's probably a sound I'm guessing quite a few will have heard on a number of occasions, particularly over the past year. So a little bit of a clue there, even if my sound effect is appalling. Love it or hate it, what's the brand? Easy one. So there's no brand name here, but can you tell me the brand? And I like this one because it's a really good example of shape and color being distinctive assets, but being distinctive assets when they are used together. So for example, I suspect if you took that swoosh of yellowy gold off and maybe even the words, red on its own probably wouldn't signify the brand. Equally, the yellowy gold on its own probably wouldn't signify the brand. But when you put them together and they're used in this context, I'm sure you'll all have got that. Smell-o-vision is, a smell of the perhaps something of the future. So I can't offer you a smell of this, but the point is certain distinctive assets have a smell and olfactory quality to them. So see if you can name that brand. And the last one I think I've got in the mix, and I picked this because I think this is a brilliant example of the power of distinctive assets. So this particular brand, in support of Age UK and tackling loneliness amongst elderly people, developed a campaign entitled No Words. So effectively, they took the brand name off their packaging. I know you'll get this, and I suspect even if that illustration, the white illustration of the glass and a half, was to be removed from this packaging, you would still be able to name the brand. So there they all are. I'm hoping most of you got 100%. What you probably noticed, I'd hope you'd have noticed and observed through going through those, is that distinctive brand assets are multisensory. They're neurologically diverse. And the point is, because it does raise a question, why bother? Why not just stick your brand name everywhere? The point is that there are certain contexts, as I think some of these examples illustrate, where actually the brand name either isn't possible or it could be used, it's more powerful and it's more effective to use an asset other than the brand name. So flexibility is important, adaptability, because obviously we're living in a world where there are very diverse channels at brands' disposal. So assets that are adaptable are really important, and creative potential. Again, examples in here, I think, where there's extraordinary creative potential in those assets. So what makes a strong distinctive asset? Ehrenberg Bass Institute, they're really into this. They describe or they evaluate brand assets in terms of fame and uniqueness. So fame is actually how well known is that asset within your category of consumers. So you might ask a group, you might present them with one of those examples that I showed earlier and ask them to name the brand, just as we did. Uniqueness would be how many of those then identify the brand correctly. So what you're looking for, the objective with any distinctive asset, is to get maximum fame, maximum uniqueness. And again, I think most of those examples probably tick that box. But if you were to assess yours, you would probably find, actually, I've got a color which is fairly famous, but is it always associated with our brand? Or I've got something which is completely unique, but I don't think anybody's actually aware of it. So if you're high on uniqueness and low on fame, it might be a time to invest in raising the prominence of that particular asset. If you're high fame and you're high uniqueness, it's probably too much work to try and become unique if plenty of other people or people are confusing that asset with other brands and not associating it just with yourself. And down the bottom, I think if you're weak on fame and you're weak on uniqueness, you probably need to be looking elsewhere. So big questions, and a task that you could do quite easily in a light touch level. To do this properly requires some research, but thinking about your own brand, what are your distinctive assets? What are your codes? What are those proxies for the brand name? Have you got any? To be honest with yourself. Do you think there's anything that shown in isolation would be immediately associated with your brand name? Which of the ones that you do have, or you think you have, work particularly well? Which maybe have potential if they were to be worked a little bit harder, perhaps have some creative potential? Does your palette of codes, your palette of assets, fundamentally need broadening? You don't need too many, 3, 4. That might be all you need to cover the flexibility, the adaptability that you need. And fundamentally, can you work them harder? The tendency is to let them tick along, but actually there is value. This is all part of brand building. There is value in building the recognition and the recall for those assets. Smaller brands. So I've shown you they're all high profile brands. They're brands that have TV level budgets, household names. And it does raise the question, because most of the research into distinctive assets is around consumer, retail, bigger brands with those sorts of budgets. So does it work for smaller brands? I've been thinking a lot about this. We've got a number of examples, but the example I wanted to include today, I think probably hits the mark the most. And it goes back, the story goes back to what was possibly a throwaway comment by the then marketing director of the Mortgage Works. And the Mortgage Works is the specialist intermediary facing division of Nationwide Building Society. Again, possibly shown this in previous presentations, so some of you might be familiar with the Mortgage Works. If you're a landlord, there's a good chance you might even have one of their buy-to-let products. So I don't like orange triggered a very interesting debate, because at that point we were looking at the visual identity for the Mortgage Works. And the Mortgage Works today looks like this. And if you were to sort of isolate these elements, there are logo elements, color plays a strong part of it, but it's perhaps the figures that are the most distinctive assets in the Mortgage Works brand asset palette. It's the treatment of the figures, the color, the use of orange, white and black in the figures. And they've proved to be, they have evolved over the years, but they've proved to be adaptable, they've proved to be flexible, and they are now at the point where they are consistently recognized and identified as being the Mortgage Works. And that presents lots of potential. And if we look back, 2006, to sort of illustrate the evolution of the brand identity and those distinctive assets, we're not a million miles away from where we were. And we've had to fight for it a little bit. And it's been worth it, because alongside creating these distinctive assets, the Mortgage Works have also worked hard to be different. So similar to the example I showed previously, the Mortgage Works differentiates on the basis of the level of support it provides its intermediaries, the brokers that it works with. And that combination of being there for brokers, going beyond just the products and criteria and rates, but providing a service that goes that step further, that really values, appreciates, and works with brokers to make their lives easier, alongside having a visual identity, which in their particular category has incredible standouts, has proved incredibly effective. So they've ticked both the differentiation and the distinctiveness boxes. And as a result, how well you can see this, I'm not sure, but this is research that's been carried over for nearly 15 years now. And the result has been that TMW has been at the top of the unprompted willingness to recommend metric for specialist buy-to-let intermediary facing lenders. And it's through that combination of having a different proposition, relatively different, it's not significantly different, but it's enough, alongside a very distinctive identity. So in summary, to wrap things up, be bland, but be bland at your peril. Focus on being different, both different and distinctive. They shouldn't be two different opposing camps. I think when they work together, it's a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario. And be strategic with both in the way that you think, and you look hard at how you're going to position yourself in the market. Take a similarly strategic approach to the creation of and the development and the building of your distinctive assets. Look at where they are now, understand what's working, what you have, what you don't have, and where the potential is. And as a rule of thumb, if you're bored of an asset, you should probably be using it more. It's much like the adage that goes with advertising. The point at which you're bored of an advertisement is probably the time at which your audience are first taking note of it. But it's particularly so with assets. And they are subject to new people coming in, wanting to change things, trends, everything. Evolve your assets, find creative ways to develop your assets, but don't drop them for the sake of change. And of course we can help. This is what we do. We're a brand strategy and creative agency. Developing distinctive assets is part of what we do. And if you look at the process, it begins with auditing, looking at where you are now in the way I described, but doing that in a more potentially more robust way, some research with that, developing a strategy. So once you've got the insights from that, you can actually identify where you should be focusing and where you shouldn't be. Looking at how then you breathe some creative life into that, so you really sweat those assets in a way that delivers the most value. And of course, monitoring them. You start with benchmarking where you are now. 6 months in, look again. Where are we now? How can we evolve it? What do we need to change? And it's that feedback loop. And that, I'm looking at my clock because I know in rehearsal I went over slightly, is it. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that of value.
Ali, amazing. We said this in the rehearsal, and you probably thought I'm not going to bring this up, but I've started, for everyone that's watching, I started nicknaming Ali the postman.
Because he needs another job.
No, no, because you always deliver. You always deliver on brilliant presentations for Marketing Showcase. So thank you very much for your time and going through that.
Pleasure.
We have had some questions. We've got 2 minutes remaining, so I'm going to crack into those. But before we do, I'm just going to pop up a poll in typical Marketing Showcase fashion. So anyone that wants to engage, that enjoyed that presentation, that wants to engage with mark making afterwards, they've got some guides available, and of course a 30-minute consultation on all the topics that Ali covered in this talk. So let's dive into questions. We might go a little bit over on time here, so I appreciate if anyone needs to move on, they can do, but I'd like to rinse through a few of these questions, so let's get into it. So Rosie's asked, how do you start to build a distinctive brand?
It's a really good question. So I think if, can you still see my screen?
Yeah, I was just going to stop you sharing myself, actually.
Okay. Yeah, no, okay, that's fine. How do you build a distinctive brand? If you're going from scratch, does Rosie mention whether building from scratch or as in?
She doesn't, but should we say that she's already got a brand?
Yeah.
You know, most of these marketers are going to be already in the position where they've got a brand. So let's say that.
I think that's where you need to take stock of what you have. So the first thing is to audit your assets. So take a very critical look at what you have, and separate color, shape, logo, any lines, any slogans that you might be using, advertising styles, and look at initially, I guess, your own take on how perhaps famous and unique they might be within your market. To do it properly, you should really research them within the market. You should actually test them with, survey them with part of your audience. But if you're not able to do that, because I appreciate not everybody has the budgets to do that, you can still, I think, learn quite a bit from just taking a look yourself and talking to other people, and then identify from those which you feel have the most potential. So it's a kind of, do we lose it or do we use it? And if we use it, then how can we make more of it? How can we really make it cut through? How can we make it become fully synonymous with our brand name? But it has to start with benchmarking where you are now, taking stock of where you are now.
Okay, brilliant. I hope that answers that question for you, Rosie. And on to the next question. I'm going to read this as it is, and then we'll kind of dive into it. So do you think longevity is a factor in being successful, or can it be detrimental if seen as a bland rather than a brand? So the way I read that was, you've got old companies that have grown and grown and grown, and their industries become maybe stale and stagnant. And is that something that you come across time and time again, and how can you kind of combat that?
I think that's where the creative, two things there. That's where it becomes dangerous in terms of dropping assets that you feel maybe perhaps a bit boring, a bit tired, but actually are the very things that make you identifiable as you. So resisting that temptation, if you're the decision maker, resisting the temptation, like the I don't like orange story. Resist that urge. If you're bored of it, it's probably a good thing. And then it becomes, right, okay, how can we refresh it? How can we perhaps use it differently? I don't know if anyone watching Google's some of the work that KFC have done. So they revitalized Colonel Sanders. They put other famous celebrities disguised as Colonel Sanders. So they took a brand asset, a distinctive brand asset that hadn't changed, and didn't fundamentally change it. They just found a creative way to use it, right through to doing like a Mother's Day strippers routine with all these guys looking like Colonel Sanders. So find ways to revitalize it and inject new life into it, but resist that urge to go, well, I think we've had it too long, let's get rid of it.
Yeah, brilliant. You mentioned about Wednesdays. Wednesdays. Oh God, you can tell I'm tired at the end of this event. You mentioned about orange.
Yes,
And
yeah,
a few people in the chat were talking about the telecoms business, who obviously made very famous Orange Wednesdays, hence why I said Wednesdays. Was that a good example of an asset that they've used there? Have they turned a day of the week into an asset that makes you think?
I think it's a great example. You know, it was fundamentally, it was orange and black, wasn't it? And they took their name, and the future's orange. So they created a number of assets. You know, that as a strapline, the future is orange Wednesdays. The using the name itself, that, you know, it had nothing to do at face value with telecoms. So it was so distinctive in that respect. It kind of broke the mold for how.
What's weird about that though is because I believe, and we were talking about this in the chat, the only reason I bring it up is I know that Compare the Market now, which was one of your examples in the quiz, they now do their own thing on a Wednesday where you can get 2-for-1 cinema tickets. But as a customer of Compare the Market, I always think back to Orange Wednesdays. It's that much of a queue, and you know, it's created that space in my mind that they're there. Also, I wanted to share with you just before we close this one up. There's no more questions coming through. If anyone does want to put a question in whilst I do this, a few of the answers that you got for your quiz, a couple of them are just quality. So one of them that came up: Cadbury's or Dairy Milk?
Okay, yeah.
You know, what was the brand there that you think of? I thought of Cadbury's, but you're probably quite right that actually the brand is Dairy Milk. That's but then somebody put for your put
nobody's going to get that, are they?
Put Jaws. To be fair, quite a few people put Netflix before you even said it. So I think it's a really good example there that
despite my sound effects.
But I did think, I put in the chat I was going to challenge the visitors, and generally speaking, I got beat to the punch quite a few times on there. But it was just proof that all the marketers love a logos quiz or that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It was good. So look, I'm going to end this presentation by saying, Ali, thank you very much for your time. Amazing to have you on the schedule again. It was a really good presentation. I certainly enjoyed it, and I know a lot of our attendees took a lot from that. So hi everyone, thanks for watching another recording from Marketing Showcase Online. I hope you enjoyed it. Just to let you know, we've got all of the recordings uploaded to our brand new YouTube channel, so go over there and check it out if you want some more great content. We run these events once every month, free of charge, so head over to our website to grab tickets for next month's event. I look forward to seeing you there.